Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Sara Diamond, and I'm so excited to welcome you on behalf of SNP and OCAD University and our colleagues at the Audience Agency and our partners and all of Data Ecoculture. Thank you to all of the participants for your attendance and commitment. Thanks to the speakers, the panelists, the moderators, for generously sharing your experience and inspiring exchanges. We have 1,100 people who were with us today and with different patterns through the day, and we have 1,757 who have registered for the entire event. So we're very proud to share our experience with you. Before we move on to what will be a phenomenal treat, which is artist Jer Thorp, I'm going to just share some of the highlights of today, and there were many. We started with an address by Minister MacLeod, who talked about how the pandemic has helped to encourage the growth of digital media and also interest in the music industry. And she talked about how investment in those digital platforms will continue after the pandemic. Deputy Minister Hilary Hartley from Ontario looked at our digital service standards and also shared a lot of information on Ontario's open data platform. I think some news to all of us and valuable across Canada and internationally. A very, very rich source of open data. We had a great panel on sharing and why we should do that with SNP, Ontario Arts Galleries, and the Audience Agency. We moved on to learn about what we can understand in terms of COVID-19 and a really, really great conversation. Basically, people want to come back to the museum, the theater, the festival. It all depends on the vaccination, but also a great debate there about what kind of content people want and an encouragement from the cultural sector to do brave content, that people don't just want celebration. They want the depth of cultural content when they come back. We had a workshop on data visualization that was rich with images and examples and a kind of how-to manual from very simple to complex. And if you want a primer, go and look at it. It's online for you to review. We went on to look at using comparative data to ensure that decisions are meaningful, looking at benchmarking that is about benchmarking in class rather than year-by-year comparisons, some really good learnings there, and a really helpful panel on data sharing for reach, resilience, and relevance. And colleagues there talked about equity, diversity, and inclusion, a big theme throughout the entire day, and why it's important to explain why you want to collect and share data, what benefits there are for different actors, and the need to collect something new, not just plug the holes in terms of data sharing. So a big call for creative collaborations and also data capacity built from the ground up. Moved on to look at data to plan and review your business model, where people chatted about the need for customer segments and for producing segments and understanding the integration with secondary data sources. This was a theme from yesterday as well in terms of looking at really great StatsCan data, great American data that's available, and European data to integrate the data you collect to get a deeper understanding. Then a very helpful conversation about using external tools to benefit cultural organizations. And moving on then to a discussion on using data to ensure that all voices are heard and their needs are met on the panel, engaging diverse audiences. I left that one to come to chair this, but as I was leaving, they were talking about how important audience data is to prove that there is a demand for diverse stories and to really inspire investment. That empirical data has certainly shown that diversity in production, in the producer team, really engenders interest across very broad audiences. So lots of work happening in the Canadian context and actually globally in looking at segmented audiences, the Black, the Indigenous audience, et cetera, and what their interests are, as well as understanding the producing community. So those were some highlights. Very productive, exciting day. Just a reminder for those of you who couldn't be 3 places at once that all of this is recorded and available to you so you can go back and have a chance to review and see it. So now it's a very exciting moment for me to introduce Jer Thorp. I encourage participants to share in the chat things that they remember from the day, and what they liked the most, and we can capture some of that. And also there will be a Q&A with Jer after this session. Also, just to let you know that Brian Fu has been providing music that you listen to in between the sessions, and he is an artist and a music creator who shares his beautiful work online. So now, Jer. Jer is an artist, a writer, and a teacher who lives in New York City. He's best known for designing the algorithm to place the nearly 3,000 names on the 9/11 Memorial in Manhattan. He was the New York Times first data artist in residence and is a National Geographic explorer, and in 2017 and 18 served as the innovator in residence at the Library of Congress. He truly is one of the world's foremost data artists and is a leading voice for the ethical use of data. He also has produced data-inspired artwork in New York's Times Square, at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan, at Ars Electronica Center in Austria, and the National Seoul Museum in Korea, as well as his work as a designer appearing in many, many diverse publications. He teaches. The lucky students have access to him as an adjunct professor at NYU's, New York University's renowned interactive telecommunications program. And he's also co-founder of the Office for Creative Research. In 2015, Canadian Geographic named him as one of Canada's greatest explorers. Jer, I am such a fan, as you know, and I am so thrilled that you're going to share just a little bit of the tip of the iceberg of your fabulous talent with us. So over to you.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here. I do live in New York, but I am Canadian. So it's nice to be in a room with a number of my fellow Canadians, albeit virtually. It's been a long time since I've been able to come home, and I miss it dearly. I want to start off this presentation just with a couple of acknowledgements, and I think that some of this has already been done, but it's always a good thing to do it again. So I am talking to you from traditional Canarsia and Munsee Lenape land. And later in the talk, I'm going to be showing a piece that was done by collecting environmental data on the traditional land of the Tsutsina, the Blackfoot, and the Ktunaxa people. I have spent a great deal of time over the last 10 years considering this question, which is, what is it like to live in data? I do believe that you and I and our children and our grandparents and pretty much everyone we know live in data. It touches every part of our lives. It touches education, it touches childhood, it touches work and retirement, it touches death, it touches everything that we do as humans, and more so every day. And so to ask this question, to think about what does it feel like to live in data, I think is an important one. And to be blunt, if we were to just pick one answer to this question, it sucks. And I mean that in a pejorative sense, but I also mean it in a kind of vacuum cleaner sense. I mean, to all of us right now, through our web browsers, through this Microsoft Teams platform that we're on, through our phones in our pockets, are being collected from as we speak. And so I think about three things when I'm defining this experience of being people who live in data. First, it's this experience of being constantly collected from or surveilled. Second is not feeling like you have a lot of agency within these data systems. And then third is to be overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. So collected from, surveilled, lack of agency, to sort of feel overwhelmed in the face of these systems. These are not particularly great conditions to be in. And not only that, they amplify existing conditions that already are the case for marginalized people. And so to think about what it might be like to live better in data, I think is an important question. And so one of the ways that I've been kind of framing this question in my mind is to think about citizenship. So what is it like, and what should it like to be like to be a citizen of data? And just coming back first to a second from this word collect, which I'm going to come back to again throughout the talk. Facebook's user agreement uses the word collect 17 times, and in the way that they use this, you might be forgiven to sort of assume that the word collect is this really harmless act. We might picture like a lederhosen forager up in the Alps, kind of gently picking berries from bushes, and this type of narrative is advantageous to the people doing the collecting. And a lot of you work or come from backgrounds of cultural institutions where the word collect also has meaning. We have museum collections, gallery collections, so on and so on and so on. And more, we're talking about collecting data from the people who visit those institutions. So what can we do to make that small chunk of citizenship also more fair and more just for people? This is somebody who I admire a great deal. Her name is Grace Lee Boggs. She was a labor activist from Detroit, amongst many other things. And a couple of years before she died, she wrote a book called The Next American Revolution, which was considering the ways in which the world might proceed to be kind of a better place. And she focuses on this idea of participatory and place-based concepts of citizenship and democracy. And what I want to talk about today is really some explorations that I've done to understand how can we put those words to work. And so a lot of the work that I'm going to show you was done with a studio that I ran here in Brooklyn for a number of years called the Office for Creative Research. And so maybe a really good thing to say before I dive into the work is that none of this work is owned by me. It was all done with lots of amazing collaborators. And yeah, couldn't have been done without a huge team effort. So we did a lot of weird stuff at the OCR, from data visualizations to a lot of things that I always like to describe as us trying to find kind of methods for breaking data's rules. So that meant putting data into public space. This is a data sculpture that we did outside of Manchester's Town Hall in the UK. This is another data sculpture that we put into Times Square. In this particular case, it's a data sculpture that represents immigration data. And we put this in the middle of the world's busiest public space a few weeks after Trump's first failed Muslim ban. And the idea was to give people a chance to really physically walk through this data and find the ways in which their lives are intertwined with immigration. And so from the front, you can see it looks like a heart. It was timed around Valentine's Day. But from the back, it's a series of these stacked bar graphs that show the population of New York City from various countries. New York City has the highest foreign-born population of any other city in the world, both by number and by percentage. And it was a really exciting project for all kinds of reasons. First of all, it was physically seen by millions of people, and we got to watch the way that they interacted with it. And almost all of them interacted with it in the same way, which was to take a selfie. So here's somebody doing that. They'd find the place that either they're from or their grandparents are from or their friends are from, and they would take a selfie and send it to them, which is a pretty weird way to interact with data. And to get even weirder, this was Valentine's Day, and we had a number of people get married in front of the sculpture, which is probably the first time that people have been married in front of a data visualization, which was really fun for us to watch. But we did even weirder things with data. These are some images from a set of performances we did at the Museum of Modern Art in collaboration with an experimental theater group called the Elevator Repair Service. And in these performances, the actors for 40 minutes recited nothing but the database from the museum, their acquisitions database verbatim. And so we used a series of algorithms and some kind of human tweaking to make these scenes that would examine the contents of the museum's collections, but also some of their political context. And so this was a way for us to take the data, which is really an archive of the history of the institution, and put it into the galleries, sort of bringing data in line with other practices of institutional critique, which the museum has definitely been subject to over the years. as Sara mentioned, I was also at the Library of Congress for a couple of years. I'm not going to talk about any of the Library of Congress work, but if you're interested in it, I recorded an 8-part podcast while I was there called Artists in the Archive, which I would super love it if you took some time to listen to. All right, so with all that said, I'm going to talk about 3 projects. And the first one is actually not mine, but it's a project that I've become a little bit obsessed with. This is James Yarker. James is one of the co-founders of a theater group called Stan's Calf. They're based in Birmingham in the UK. And this particular project came out of a question that James had. James grew up in a small town in England, and he didn't travel outside of the country until one of their early Stan's Calf projects became quite famous. And so he went touring from country to country, and it really blew his mind how big the world was. And he came back home with a real fixation of the number that's the human population, which at the time was just over 6 billion. And so he started to think in his mind of ways that he might represent such a big number. And as a theater person, he was also thinking about how to put those numbers in space and how to build ways for people to interact with them. I know as a data visualization practitioner that people don't have a great capacity for understanding large numbers. Like we fall apart in the low hundreds. Our brain just kind of doesn't have a good way to grasp these big numbers, which are becoming more important from day to day. And so James and his team came up with this idea to use rice, and they would count and weigh the rice. And over the period of the show, the people who were part of the theater group would sort and sweep and pile this rice into various piles that represented different things. So on the left here, people born in the USA today. On the right, people who will die in the USA today. And so for the full sort of run of these shows, which last for a couple of weeks, the group is entirely engrossed in this process of counting. And the visitors too get engrossed in this process of counting. One of the nice things that I think happens in the show is that you're given a grain of rice as you come in, which kind of represents you, and then you get to consider yourself kind of in the face of all these myriads of numbers. And these numbers change context depending on where it's being shown. So this is some examples from London when the show was done there. But as it's moved from place to place, the numbers are kind of built from things that are just generally fascinating to things that are specifically fascinating in popular culture. So this one reads, the people who bought the Beatles single Can't Buy Me Love on the first day of its release in the United States. And one of the parts that I love the most about this is that it took a few years, but James was actually able to answer his question about what does 6, or by that time he did it 7.5 billion grains of rice look like when they staged this show in an old German trolley warehouse, and 4 container trucks packed to the roof with rice arrived in the back, and they weighed and counted out 7 billion grains of rice that people could stand next to and consider their kind of relationship to this thing. And what I love the most about this show is that it evokes this kind of idea that there is somewhere a government agency that you hadn't before heard of who is entirely involved in the act of counting. And it reminds the people who visit, first of all, that there are people involved in the act of counting, but also that numbers are very local things, and that their context changes from time to time, but also from place to place. I love this quote from James when I asked him why he thought the piece really worked, and he sort of said that he thought it was about the shape of the rice, that these oblong shape remind us of our own bodies, and therefore we're able to consider these things in a very human fashion, which is actually a pretty hard thing to achieve using data. The second project I want to show you also considers the idea of place, but it considers it across a much longer scale of time. So in about 4 years ago, myself and a team of glaciologists and a couple of engineers traveled up to the Bow Glacier, which is a glacier in Banff National Park, and we installed a permanent seismic observatory. So it's a little hard to see there on the cliff face, which is intentional. We didn't want it to be easy to see. But what this observatory does is it measures the movement of the glacier. And that movement of the glacier is then translated into data. And that data is sent via satellite in real time to downtown Calgary. And I want to show you a little video of this. So if you could please get that video playing, that would be great. Did that video play? I can't really tell from my end.
No.
So we So the last project I want to share with you is called the Map Room, and it's a project that really takes these ideas and I think puts them to work in the grandest way that we've found a way to do so far. So I found myself doing a long residency in the city of St. Louis, which is a city that before I did the residency, I didn't know much about. And we had all kinds of ideas, sculptures, performances, some of the stuff that we kind of showed and talked about before. But after Michael Brown was killed in the outside parts of the city in August of 2015, the focus changed from building something that was an experience to building something that was a place that people could come and talk around some of the issues that the city has and around data. And so we took over this abandoned school, this gymnasium in an abandoned school, and we built this place for people to come and make these huge maps, which they would then use to explore civic data. And so the making of the map is this really messy material thing. People use pens and markers, they use paints, they use crayons, they stitched in photographs, they did all kinds of things. And on this 10-foot by 10-foot platform, it was this really social experience. And then when they were done making these maps, we built this kind of projection system that would very accurately put data layers on top of it. So everything from census data to historical data about the city, well, all kinds of things that would allow them to talk over the issues that each of them was having some experience with through their lived existence in the city. So we had people from the food bank make maps that they were able to kind of examine the ways that they were serving the city. We had all kinds of groups make all kinds of different maps. I want to just share one story about it before I leave you, which is this group of students from a school called Brittany Woods. And so these are 7th grade students, and they came into our space and they authored this map, which was of their neighborhood and the places in their neighborhood that they considered to be safe and not safe. And I'm going to actually skip the video and just go right to the finished map. And what we did with our facilitator, Emmett Cottedral, is we allowed the students to walk through various different data layers. And the one that got them the most excited was this one, which is the projection right on top of their neighborhood of a 1930s redlining map. So many of you might be familiar with these maps. They were used to determine which homeowners would and which ones wouldn't get loans after the Great Depression. And what we know now is that these were racist instruments. They were designed specifically to exclude Black Americans from home ownership. And what the students, these 7th graders, realized right away from when they looked on this map is that they could see ways in which that map still was lingering in their neighborhood. One student told me that when she walked to school, she would cross the sidewalk, and on one side of the sidewalk, the sidewalks were all cracked, and on the other side, they were clean and new. And she could see that division in this particular map. And so this was really exciting and really encapsulates what I hope encapsulates the kinds of things that I've been talking about, which is how do we take data and change it from this kind of active collection, from this one-directional thing where we're taking data from people and kind of putting it to our own uses, and how do we then switch that around such that it's data in the service of people's citizenship, in the service of their belonging. If all this stuff is interesting to you, I would be remiss not to mention that I have a book coming out next Tuesday in Canada and the United States that you can go to your local bookstore and buy. And there are many, 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 many more stories inside about data. Thank you.
Jer, that was just a fantastic presentation, and we don't have time for questions, but I just want to underline some of the things that you talked about. In particular, the importance of data in the public realm, both in the public realm in terms of data art, and thank you so much for sharing those examples, but also, in the online environment and also in terms of open data and access. I love the way that you manage data as a kind of material practice, with a kind of specificities, but like a kind of clay, literally, that you sculpt with. The ways that you engage users and the mapping work that you've shown is fantastic. And then your ability to move across different dimensions, from posters to interactive sites to sculpture to a data gathering instrument on a glacier that I remember deeply and care about a lot. The ability to, in a sense, act as a fifth column. So the work that you did of, reminding Calgarians of their water sources and the impacts of the oil and gas industries, which are so fundamental to the Alberta economy, really, really important work. And then also the ways that the work that you do, because you make data so accessible, really underscores data fluency and makes data less scary, and really something that's, exciting and an opportunity. So thank you, very, very much, for your work. And I'm going to just end with about a minute of information for people about tomorrow, and then actually bookend the day as we started this morning with a land acknowledgement. So tomorrow our theme is innovating with your data, projecting into the future and building long-term strategies, activities not to miss, audiences of the future, data and dollars, be seen and heard, in building Indigenous content and audiences. And I do want to remind us as we started today that even though we are on a virtual platform, we should take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands, which we each call home from coast to coast to coast in Canada. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me to acknowledge the values, perspectives, languages, and cultures which can guide and inspire us, the role of Indigenous people as guardians and stewards of the lands, and consider how each of us can, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And Jer, so much thanks to you for also starting your talk in a grounded way. Tomorrow, there's also networking one-to-one. There's a solutions bar. You can book a consultation with one of our experts on the panel. And just want to thank you so much, everybody, for being with us today. Thanks again to Jer, and a huge shout out to the team who is making this event possible. Have a great evening, and see you at 10 a.m. or 7 a.m. or 4 p.m. Or 6 p.m., wherever you are joining us from. So see you tomorrow, and thanks, everybody.